you quite often, you have a period of great prosperities, and it gets overextended with debt. It creates a bubble. Then you have a downturn, a depression. Interest rates can't be lowered anymore. Print money. What has been true in history is that when you have an economic downturn, that's a serious economic downturn, and less effective monetary policies at that same time, and you have a large wealth and values gap and political gaps, you tend to have fighting, rising internal conflict about how to divide the wealth pie. And so that's the dynamic I think that we're now seeing. I experienced through my lifetime surprises about things that never happened in my lifetime before, but happened many times in history before. The three forces that we're talking about, which is there is a long-term debt cycle, the large wealth and political gaps that go with it, and the rise of a great power to challenge existing great power, happened in the 1930 to 45 period and happened many times before, and are the big drivers, not just of the economic environment, but of the whole environment. So let me start with the debt cycle. In 1945, we began a new world order. 1944, we created a new monetary system, the Bretton Woods monetary system. And then we created that new world order. And that created a bull markets in stocks and an American world order for the most part. There's a cycle that we're used to in which whenever you have an economic downturn, the central bank hits the gas and can create debt expansion, and that produces an increase in demand. And that happens in three phases of the cycle. Normally, it's interest rates. You lower interest rates and the economy turns up. But when you hit zero interest rates, which happened in 1932, debt crisis, 1932, we hit zero interest rates. Then you go to the second type of monetary policy in which central banks print money and buy financial assets to add liquidity. And those purchases, those sellers of bonds who get the cash, go out and they buy other financial assets, and we have the process going through. And that's the second type of monetary policy. So the only two times that happened was 2008 to 9, 1929 to 1932, zero interest rates, print money, monetization. That'll carry you so far. And then there's what I call monetary policy 3, which means that that money does not trickle down to the population and go all the places that it's needed to go. And that monetary policy means that there has to be what we're seeing now in monetary policy. In other words, the coordination between fiscal and monetary policy so that the central bank is buying assets of a different sort, a wide range of assets, producing liquidity, and also having the effect of buying government debt and monetizing it. And that's the late cycle of an expansion. That's what's driving the markets now. That's what's driving the economy now. For example, the Federal Reserve and the government is creating the liquidity that we're seeing in the markets. And it has big implications for the value of money. What is the value of money? Where does money go? Cash is going to be a poor investment. That if you look at the returns of asset classes and you take cash, isn't it an interesting world when you have zero or negative interest rates? When there's so much liquidity, it is the central bank that is making that market. So when we look at the market today, it needs the storehold of wealth, and you see it reflected in all asset classes. So that's the main driver. And it also has very big geopolitical implications, because as we come into this environment where we have the second influence, the wealth gap, the political gap, it means that the distinction of how money and the bills are going to be divided and how that will affect tax policy and the like will matter a lot. I think it's very much like the 1930s, which means when it doesn't produce immediately a general level of inflation. It negates deflationary pressures. And what it does is it produces currency depreciations over a period of time. In the 1930s, all currencies in the early 30s depreciated in relationship at that time in relationship to gold. And so what we see is the same kind of thing happening without a general level of inflation, but not just gold. It goes into other storeholds of wealth, and stocks is an important, particularly certain types of stocks it goes into, and very much the same as 1933. In 1933, March of 1933, Franklin Roosevelt severed the connection with gold, printed money, and made money available. And that was the exact bottom in the stock market. Very similar to April 9th when Federal Reserve and the Treasury did the same thing. So that goes into other assets such as stocks and so on. It is necessary to be done because the consequences of not doing it are unacceptable. The wealth gap and so on. We're in a situation where every individual, every company, every government has a certain amount of revenue, a certain amount of expenses, and a certain balance sheet. And when the revenue goes down and to be low or inadequate relative to the expenses, and there's not an adequate balance sheet, then defaults and restructurings take place. That's true for the population as a whole, and that's true for a number of businesses, hence the policies that we're seeing. What has been true in history is that when you have an economic downturn, that's a serious economic downturn, and less effective monetary policies at that same time, and you have a large wealth and values gap and political gaps, you tend to have fighting, internal conflict. And so rising internal conflict about how to divide the wealth pie is very, very normal historically. And so that's the dynamic I think that we're now seeing that will become manifest in changes in tax policy and so on. And this is a pattern, by the way, that's gone down before history. You quite often, you have a period of great prosperity, like the 1920s. And it gets overextended with debt because everybody bets on the past being continued. And it creates a bubble, 1929. Then you have a downturn, a depression. Interest rates can't be lowered anymore. Print money, the expansion, internal conflict. Internal conflict and also economic conflict tends to coincide with external conflict, particularly when there is a comparable power rising. So that dynamic is going on and will be important.